All right, folks, grab your cocoa, light those gingerbread-scented candles, and prepare for the most festive retelling of the Nativity since Aunt Gertrude accidentally mixed up the Christmas cards with her bingo prizes. Yes, it's time to dive headfirst into a time when a teenager gave birth in a barn, a couple of farm animals became arguably the first witnesses to a miracle, and angels decided to throw a celestial choir practice right in the middle of the desert. Because who doesn't want some unsolicited heavenly feedback while trying to figure out if your baby in a manger game plan is on point? Welcome to the birth of Jesus, a peaceful Christmas retelling, where we unwrap those glaringly absurd layers of the most romanticized birth story in history and find out just how many times the word peace is repeated in an ancient text filled with drama worthy of a soap opera. Spoiler alert, it's a lot. Now, did you ever wonder what kind of crazy dynamics were at play when Mary found out she was going to be the mother of the Messiah? Or just how Joseph handled the "do I stay or run for the hills" moment when he got the news? We're talking last-minute road trips, a search for last-minute accommodations that look more like the classic sitcom episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm than a sacred event. And let's not forget the element of surprise with wise men showing up with gifts that, where I come from, are usually reserved for the baby shower. And they weren't bringing something practical like diapers or a onesie matching with mom. Oh no, just a little gold, frankincense, and myrrh, a gift set so ridiculously impractical it could give any new parent a mild heart attack. So settle in as we explore the hilarious, poignant, and downright mind-boggling aspects of a night that changed the world, from the quirky cast of characters to the inconvenient weather conditions that last-minute travelers like to ignore. After all, nothing says peaceful like a pregnant Mary riding on a donkey while lamenting her lack of a good Wi-Fi signal while she's desperately trying to post a manger selfie on Marybook. By the end, you might just find yourself questioning if you'd really want to trade your black coffee for some mystical star following, tranquil scene where every last detail seems a little too perfect for common sense. So, grab a seat in the front row of this holiday extravaganza, because it's going to be a joyous ride down memory lane, with a whole lot of laughter and a sprinkle of divine irony. And hey, if you get a little message from above during this retelling, just remember, the angels are probably laughing too. December 20, somewhere just outside ancient Bethlehem. The starry sky is annoyingly bright tonight thanks to what can only be described as first-century celestial overkill. A trio of shining orbs parked suspiciously close in the sky, causing a traffic jam among local astrologers and confused shepherds alike. The scene: a dimly lit stable reeking faintly of hay, livestock, and a desperate attempt at rustic charm. The flickering oil lamp casts long, jittery shadows on the faces of our two protagonists. Mary, glowing with maternal exhaustion, and Joseph, whose expression perfectly captures every dad joke he's ever wanted to make about sleigh rides, but wisely refrains from uttering. Nearby, a cow chews its cud with all the enthusiasm of a bored palace guard, while a donkey plots its own escape plan. The star of this particular nocturnal fiasco? None other than the humble manger, a trough repurposed as a crib because, evidently, the makers of baby bassinets hadn't quite streamlined the invention curve yet. It's cushioned with straw scratchier than a Pharisee's sermon and smells like a bargain bin at the local petting zoo. Tension builds as the guests begin to arrive, or rather slowly wander in, uncertain if they should be more shocked at the heavenly fanfare or the unsanitary sleeping arrangements. Shepherds mill about, attempting low-key humble worship while furtively checking their flocks every few minutes, as if their sheep might sprout wings and fly off mid-adoration. Then come the wise men, arriving fashionably late thanks to their navigation system suffering from what probably looked like a defunct GPS app powered by star charts. And so begins the ritual of gift-giving, loaded with enough pomp and confusion to make any holiday gathering that feel like a diplomatic summit. Frankincense is passed around, confusing nearby animals who think it's some sort of festive feed, while myrrh is poked suspiciously. It smells like a highbrow perfume, but might just be the ancient equivalent of cough syrup. Gold, meanwhile, is awkwardly jingled, prompting Joseph to give a look that says, "Who exactly is supposed to guard all this money in a stable?" Meanwhile, Mary's labor is interrupted multiple times by curious visitors and a goat that keeps photobombing the nativity scene with enthusiastic bleats. Amid all this chaos, the newborn arrives quietly, the miraculous piece of birth punctuated by an enthusiastic donkey bray, undoubtedly the original rude awakening. In an ironic twist, despite all the heavenly heralding and three-dimensional star maps, no one had thought to schedule a proper room reservation or a decent fire. The miracle? A baby born with nothing but cosmic fanfare and a parking ticket-worthy shortage of beds. Historically speaking, records suggest the early Christians were less about Christmas trees and more about clandestine meetings and code phrases to avoid Roman attention. But the stable scene? Almost certainly a poetic invention, perfect for adding a rustic filter to a complicated story of divine politics and humble origins. So the takeaway here, if you're planning a peaceful Christmas, remember, celestial traffic jams are inevitable, star-guided navigation is overrated, and sometimes, just sometimes, a manger is all you need to start a tradition that lasts millennia. Just prepare for goats, gate crashers, and the eternal question, who forgot to book an inn? Picture this: a starry night in Bethlehem, year zero-ish, give or take a few years according to the historians who enjoy ambiguity more than certainty. The scene is set just outside the town, stinking mildly of sheep, hay, and mixed desperation. Enter Mary and Joseph, the original power couple on their way to find a place to crash. But apparently, every innkeeper in town was booked solid, thanks to some inconvenient census that nobody thought to do earlier. The lighting is decidedly low-tech, consisting primarily of twinkling stars, one suspiciously bright comet, and what might be a distant firefly convention. The smells range from farm animals doing what farm animals do to the faint scent of stale bread and the occasional whiff of hopeful anticipation. This is Bethlehem not-so-glamorous startup hospitality. Our key players: Mary, visibly pregnant, and glowing with the kind of radiant calm that belies her inner scream. Joseph, trying to look supportive but slightly bewildered, a few indifferent shepherds munching on what looks like some sort of bland grass snack, and a trio of wise men who got spectacularly lost and brought gifts that nobody was quite prepared to use: gold, frankincense, and myrrh, which sounds less like presents and more like the ingredients to a questionable medieval remedy. And right in the center of our tiny drama is the manger itself, a shabby wooden trough that smells like a donkey's private dressing room and contains the hottest food item of the moment, a half-eaten crust of unleavened bread that may or may not have been intended for the baby Jesus, but was mostly intended to keep the animals vaguely interested. The tension builds as Mary and Joseph try to settle their newborn amid the chaos while trying not to turn it into a full-blown political incident involving local innkeepers, territorial livestock, and an ever-growing crowd chanting about peace on our earth, but looking suspiciously like a mob at a discount sale. Meanwhile, ancient superstitions hover. Did the bright star signify divine import or just a cosmic flare-up? Are shepherds really trustworthy sources, or just the original conspiracy theorists? The wise men, still lost, debate whether GPS might have been a better invention than a star. Then the twist. As everyone squabbles over space, gifts, and lodging, the donkey claims a territorial bray so fierce it settles the argument instantly. Because, honestly, who can argue when a donkey is losing its mind nearby? Suddenly, the baby's placid calm turns out to be the greatest plot twist of all, proving that even in the middle of chaos and confusion, the peaceful Christmas story truly begins with a bit of hoof noise and humble bread. Historically speaking, the census was probably a bureaucratic nightmare, an ancient Excel spreadsheet, if you will, that made everything worse before it got better. And the moral? If you ever find yourself in an ancient town with no room at the inn, just bring a donkey, some bread, and an unwavering sense of peace. Because sometimes the best hospitality is reluctantly shared and capped with a bray. It is the year 1 BC, give or take a few centuries of guesswork. The scene, a dusty little town called Bethlehem, the kind of place where the livestock smells have never quite met sweet pine and eggnog. Here, under a sky littered with stars that no one bothered to name, a very different kind of crowd is gathering, not for singing Christmas carols, but because of the latest property crisis involving an infamous manger and a very confused camel. The air buzzes with the scent of hay, a hint of cow dung, and something faintly metallic, probably the Roman tax collector's temper simmering under his toga. The lighting is provided solely by flickering oil lamps and an impressive constellation of fireflies because electricity wouldn't be invented for another 2 millennia, much to everyone's disappointment. In this pastoral drama, the main players are Joseph, a carpenter with questionable GPS skills, Mary, a woman glowing with maternal glow and slightly more uncomfortable than anyone has a right to be, and a star that refuses to stop pointing in one direction as if it's trying to catch the attention of the entire ancient world. In the middle of this scene is the manger, a humble feeding trough repurposed as the star of the nativity show. Around it, animals snort contentedly, completely unconcerned about the significance of the infant soon to arrive, and far more interested in whether the hay has been changed recently. This manger is the center of an epic logistical debacle, dubbed the first case of stable politics, where no one can quite agree on who gets prime real estate near the baby, and definitely not the camels, notorious for their impressive but aromatic digestive prowess. As the hours drag on, the tension rises. Shepherds stand by nervously clutching their staffs, convinced that any sound might be a sign of celestial displeasure or merely a hungry wolf. Local midwives whisper about signs and omens, including Mary's oddly glowing complexion and Joseph's increasingly desperate attempts to shoo away a curious donkey that insists on being in every shot. The stars overhead form constellations that astrologers debate vigorously, certain that the planetary alignment somehow predicts the eventual commercial takeover of Christmas markets centuries later. Superstition runs as thick as the dust kicked up by the camel's enthusiastic pacing. There are rituals whispered about involving gifts that must not exceed 3 because anything more or less would cause eternal cosmic chaos or at least an awkward family dinner that future generations would awkwardly try to justify. And the manger itself, endlessly debated. Should it be lined with fresh straw, or would that offend the local deities who apparently have a weird sense of smell? Then, just when the tension could squeeze blood from a stone, a low cry breaks the ritual proceedings. The baby is born. The star above twinkles with what can only be described as smug approval. The donkey takes a dignified step back, acknowledging its minor supporting role. And the entire crowd exhales collectively, except the shepherds, who are already checking their notes, plotting how to spin this event into a lifelong career as the first Christmas influencers. Historically speaking, mangers weren't exactly the cozy cradles depicted in art. They were feeding troughs, basically the medieval equivalent of disposable tableware, making Mary and Joseph the original pioneers of emergency hospitality. The supposed peaceful birth? More like the original eco-friendly birth, utilizing every available resource, including suspiciously uncomfortable animal furniture. So what's the takeaway? When it comes to history's greatest birth story, remember, always check your stable politics before settling in, because even holy moments come with all the chaos of a family holiday dinner and the aroma of camel breath as an unexpected guest. Scene opens on a dusty Judean night in the year 1 BCE, the star-studded sky doing its best to outshine the incredibly awkward inn sign flickering above a fully booked establishment. The time is just past twilight, but the smell of sweat, hay, and very questionable hygiene is heavy enough to cut with a tattered shepherd's crook. Welcome to Bethlehem, PBJ capital of the Roman Empire, and the site of arguably the least luxurious lodging situation in recorded holiday history. Tightly packed between the groans of distant camels and the occasional bray of a disgruntled donkey, the atmosphere hums with the sounds of claustrophobia and desperation. Meet Joseph, a carpenter whose resume now includes amateur expert in navigating dodgy innkeepers, and Mary, his expectant wife who is quite literally glowing with anticipation, or possibly the result of poor candle placement. Their destination, a stable. The food, a questionable mashup of old barley and whatever the animals decided to nibble on that day, served next to some suspiciously licked troughs. But before you dismiss this as a humble shepherd's buffet, consider the real chaos brewing behind the scenes. The inn, a charming establishment known for its ethos of no vacancy, but somehow squeezing you in, follows an ancient ritual known as the Great Bed Shuffle, where guests are herded between rooms until someone mysteriously vanishes or agrees to sleep on a pile of hay. And amid these forced communal gatherings, tensions rise. There is whispered speculation that the innkeeper believes Mary might be harboring divine implications, and that the potential newborn could disrupt his lucrative bed-shifting racket. Add to this the age-old superstition that anyone who stays in the stable must appease the neighborhood animals with flatulence, lest they be cursed with a night of howling and pooping calamities. The local shepherds, mere steps away, engage in an oddly coordinated chorus of sheep-counting and interpretive dance meant to invite angels, or at least more attention from tourists in later centuries. Suddenly, the situation takes an unexpected turn when the humble stable, initially viewed as a less than ideal holding pen, becomes a celebrity hotspot. A trio of cultural influencers, the wise men, arrives not with Instagram stories but with camels bearing gold, frankincense, and myrrh, which ironically are the ancient equivalent of VIP swag bags. The innkeeper, initially suspicious, suddenly realizes the marketing potential. After some heated negotiations involving spices, a manger, and an improvised photo opportunity under the stars, the stable gains more prestige in one night than in decades. Historically speaking, stables were indeed the practical choice for weary travelers in overbooked towns, not glamorous retro-chic accommodations. And shepherds danced? Well, probably not. But hey, it makes for a great story and keeps the holiday spirit lively. So, what did we learn? If life closes hotel doors on you, just knock on a barn and bring your own entourage, because sometimes the best accommodations happen when you're least expecting them. Picture this. 2,000 years ago, somewhere in a dimly lit, aroma-rich Judean countryside that smells like a curious blend of hay, unwashed sheep, and a hint of royal desperation. The time? An unassuming midnight that somehow feels like the calm before an ancient soap opera storm. The place? A stable that probably missed a few Yelp reviews, but was promoted as cozy and rustic by its landlord, a certain less affluent carpenter named Joseph. Enter Mary, visibly 9 months pregnant, and about as thrilled to be house hunting in this stable as a cat in a bath. Alongside them, shepherds weave through the mist, looking less like watchmen and more like an ancient boy band called the Flocks, faintly humming dubious tunes about peace on earth and goodwill to all. The food in question? A glowing baby wrapped not in swaddle, but in the timeless punchline of manger lore, straw. Now, the absurdity begins. In a world where room reservations were apparently the ancient equivalent of trying to hail a chariot on a crowded Roman street, Joseph and Mary's journey showcases the timeless struggle of finding lodging when everyone else has RSVPD. Sorry, full. But why would a hidden reservation crisis spawn such a seminal event? Courtesy of Caesar Augustus's census, the ancient version of mandatory participation in a historical inconvenience. Shepherds nervously gather, not just to admire the baby, but because superstition dictates that seeing a divine infant might either bless you with good luck or turn you into a cautionary tale told around campfires. Add to this the wise men, a trio of well-funded astrologers who took detours through deserts and inclement weather with a GPS that was probably just a star and a vague sense of optimism. Their arrival, promised with all the subtlety of a brass band serenading a very newborn VIP, somehow turns the humble stable into history's first impromptu paparazzi zone. And then at the twist, the least expected and most historically inconvenient event of all, that baby Jesus, the so-called savior, makes the place smell worse than the livestock, probably because baby colic clearly predated the Holy Spirit's descent. Yet, in this chaotic, smelly, overcrowded barn, the true miracle wasn't just the nativity. It was the preservation of peace amid the chaos. Historically speaking, while the nativity story has been sanitized into perfectly wrapped Christmas cards, the truth is more nuanced. Census records did exist. Travel was grueling, and inns were truly overcrowded. But there were no swaddling blankets made from designer fabrics, just practical linens and presumably a fair share of baby spit-up to go around. The moral of our humble tale? Sometimes history's most world-changing moments come dressed in the least glamorous of straw-filled jackets, and remind us that no matter the epic stakes, a little patience and a lot of improvised betting can keep the peace. So remember, if you think your Airbnb booking nightmares are bad, just be glad you were. Picture this. Bethlehem, roughly 2,000 years ago, under a starry sky so bright it probably gave astrologers migraines. The town's population is swollen with babbling travelers, none of whom accounted for the sudden surge in Airbnb bookings, or, given the time, humble manger accommodations. Our lead characters, Mary, pregnant and hormonal, but shockingly calm. Joseph, confused as one might be when your lodging options are a stable or the back of a donkey, and a cast of animals who seem blissfully unaware they're sharing space with what might become world histories. As most famous infant. The scene is dimly lit by flickering oil lamps and the occasional fire pit, scent of hay mingling uncomfortably with the aroma of tweaking herbs and a touch of manure. Crickets chirp, camels grumble, and the general murmur of disgruntled innkeepers fills the air. Central to this chaotic newborn nursery is the humble manger, a wooden trough nobody planned as a crib but is now the star of the show. Hospitality in Bethlehem at this height was less about luxury and more about survival, and with the town teeming and inns booked solid, desperation was the flavor of the night. Now, tension simmers. No one wants to offend a heavily pregnant woman who might literally birth a religious icon any moment, but no one has any room either. Enter bizarre traditions, guests knocking on doors, offering odd barter deals like a live goat in exchange for warmth, or, less soothingly, communal sighs so heavy they nearly cause concussions. Meanwhile, rumors circulate that this stalwart family's child will either unite mankind or ignite a centuries-long debate on theology. The nearby shepherds whisper enthusiastically, convinced the baby will come with some dramatic cosmic sign rather than a diaper change. When Mary finally settles in the makeshift nursery, it's with the ironic relief of someone who expected a hotel but ended up with a barn. The animals, unimpressed by the sudden boost to their guest list, contribute their own version of baby lullabies, a series of grunts, neighs, and the occasional fart. But here's the kicker. Far from a quiet, peaceful arrival, this humble manger becomes the most chaotic, unconventional birth suite in recorded history, complete with awkward glances, dusty blankets, and an audience of startled animals. Historically, it's entirely plausible that Jesus' birthplace was less a divine inn and more a practical solution to a housing shortage. After all, census-driven overcrowding isn't the stuff of smooth deliveries. The takeaway? When life gives you a housing crisis, sometimes you get a star in the sky, a babbling baby, and a barn full of very opinionated animals. So, if this Christmas tells us anything, it's that even divine births start with the year is, well, definitely a long time ago, and the place, somewhere in Judea, under star-studded skies that were supposed to calm nerves but instead only embarrassed everyone with their sheer brightness. The air smells like hay, a faint trace of manure, and the persistent scent of unwashed sheep. Somewhere nearby, a donkey, unaware of the impending historical significance, farts with comic timing that sets the tone for this, supposedly peaceful holiday evening. Our scene unfolds in a stable that, frankly, looks like a last-minute Airbnb listing for an emergency stay. Rustic, a bit smelly, and lacking in all modern amenities. Inside this charmingly cramped venue, we meet our all-star cast, Mary, glowing with that special expectant glow that's somewhere between radiance and mild panic. Joseph, the perpetually bewildered carpenter who probably wished he'd gone into accounting, and the animals, chiefly a camel, who was acting as the bouncer, a suspiciously judgmental ox, and the donkey with questionable hygiene. The food centerpiece? A humble trough filled with a slurry of whatever hay was on clearance. Culinary excellence not exactly the point here, more like survival fuel. The trio must subsist on this dubious buffet while preparing for history's most famous baby debut. Tensions rise swiftly but quietly. In an age where a little upset stomach could mean a trip to the great beyond, the humblest meals were riddled with superstition. The hay trough was considered a sacred object, believed to ward off unwelcome spirits if the bundle was arranged just right. Joseph, much to Mary's annoyance, attempts a ritual he half-remembered involving chanting and strategic pigeon placement, to no avail. The camel snorts disdainfully. The ox gives a low, ominous grunt, and the donkey promptly eats the last good bit of hay, thumbing its metaphorical nose at superstitious nonsense. Just when the atmosphere hits peak absurdity, the baby is born, not with a celestial choir, but rather a robust yawn and an unexpected minor sneeze that startles the animals. The expected peace and quiet is replaced with a chorus of bleats and brays, leading Mary to dub the moment holy chaos. Historical context? Well, the truth is that stabling a birth in a manger was less about romantic humility and more about limited lodging options. Oh, and that star everyone talks about? Likely just a planet hangover from Mercury's latest awkward transit. So, the fake lesson here? When life gives you a minus star-rated stable and farm animals with attitude, remember, every legendary story starts with a smelly scene and someone getting eaten out of house and home, sometimes literally. It is generally accepted that the year was approximately 1 BCE, give or take a few centuries because ancient record-keeping was about as reliable as a toddler with a paintbrush. The place, a decidedly underwhelming stable in Bethlehem, which by all accounts was the original Airbnb minus the amenities. The air was an intoxicating mix of hay, animal musk, and the faint aroma of a shepherd's dinner that no one really wanted to identify further. Inside, the lighting was less heavenly glow and more flickering oil lamp meets questionable shadow play. Our key players. Mary, the epitome of serene, pregnant poise despite impending labor and zero room service. Joseph, the original, nervous first-time dad equipped with a confused expression and sandal confusion, and a party of barnyard animals who were clearly plotting to upstage the whole nativity scene. Front and center was the manger, a humble trough repurposed into the latest in ancient infant beds, organic, sustainable, and boasting unparalleled straw cushioning. However, it wasn't just any crib. It was the birthplace of an event that would make all subsequent Christmas dinners awkwardly nostalgic and cause shepherds everywhere to forever question their career choices. Tension mounted in typical historical fashion as the schedule dictated an arrival during the peak of animal territorial disputes and eerie caravan noises outside. Local superstition decreed that any child born in such a humble setting was destined for greatness, or at least a very complicated family tree. To heighten the stakes, the midwife had gone missing, presumably overwhelmed by the lack of glamour and persistent bleeding. Absent any professional assistance, Mary was left to channel inner strength. Joseph attempted to read an ancient manual titled How to Dad Without Instructions, and the animals roamed expectantly. Meanwhile, the humble manger became a diplomatic nightmare in miniature. The donkey was sure it deserved front-row sleeping rights, the ox was giving disdainful side-eyes, and the sheep were suspiciously silent, possibly plotting sabotage. Without a GPS or modern comforts, this high-stakes performance soon resembled an avant-garde reality show called Nativity Gone Wild. Just when all seemed poised to tip into chaos, a series of unexpected visitors arrived. A star appeared overhead, as if flashing a giant celestial neon sign saying, "Baby this way." Shepherds, famed for their lack of punctuality, arrived fashionably late, bringing with them free-range gossip and questionable shepherd's pies that no one dared to try. Then, 3 wise men entered, not bearing gifts from Amazon but carrying gold, frankincense, and myrrh, which in contemporary terms translates to a confusing assortment of fragrant but mostly useless baby presents. The twist? Despite the humble setup, lack of modern conveniences, and uncertain blood sugar levels, the baby was born peacefully, causing a ripple of harmonious cosmic relief. The animals settled down, the star shone steadily, and Joseph finally managed to assemble a makeshift crib adjacent to the manger without injuring himself. Historically speaking, the nativity setting was probably less scenic and more smelly, but it succeeded in creating a story so enduring that people would millennia later argue about the precise spot and lighting conditions as fervently as a football referee's call. So what did we learn? Even in the most chaotic of stable conditions, sometimes all you need is a little hay, a glowing star, and a patient donkey to kickstart a holiday tradition that never quite got the memo about being peaceful. Q. The celestial glow. The year, roughly 4 BCE, give or take a few decades for the astrologers to settle. The place, a dusty hill in Judea, somewhere between a camel path and a suspiciously overfull sheep pen. The absurdity. An astronomical light show so bright it makes Times Square look like a blackout party. Welcome to the original cosmic roadside attraction, the Star of Bethlehem. Think of it as the universe's very own neon sign flashing. Hey, wise men, this way to a newborn king. If only the GPS hadn't signal. The night sky was a canvas of pinpricks and streaks, illuminated by the star's peculiar glow, part glowworm, part celestial spotlight, all confusion. The scent of roasted lamb mingled with the sharp, piney zing of frankincense smuggled in by caravan traders. The air hummed with the murmurs of shepherds gossiping about this weirdly bright sky and the possible end of their late-night naps. Enter the Magi, the self-appointed VIPs of ancient wisdom, decked out in robes that could only be described as regal with a touch of desert chic. Their caravan rocked the dirt road like a desert fleet of luxury SUVs, laden with gifts that practically screamed overcompensation for past life regrets. Gold? Check. Frankincense? Obviously. Myrrh? Because if it smells a bit medicinal, it must be royal. As the wise men plotted their course, GPS-less but high on star juice, superstition and astrology led the navigation. According to ancient rites, alignment of Jupiter, Saturn, and something astronomers now call a conjunction was a cosmic tweet from the heavens. Interpretations varied wildly. Some swore it signaled a messiah's birth. Others thought it was a fancy comet crashing the party. Locals debated the star's nature like reality TV judges critiquing a performance. Was it a portent of peace or just a runaway gas flare? Did it herald divine intervention, or was it the usual cosmic prank? Meanwhile, the Magi's journey was far from peaceful. They braved monstrous bureaucracy at border crossings where toll collectors had never heard of three kings following a star. They witnessed skeptical shepherds shaking their heads while polishing their crooks, and one particularly melodramatic camel that refused to budge unless bribed with an extra date. But the climax came when the star baffled its own fans. Just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. The wise men, now stargazers turned lost tourists, were forced to rely on a local innkeeper's dubious directions. 2 turns past the inn, through a stable, and if you hit the manger, you've gone too far. In a twist befitting a cosmic sitcom, it turns out the star wasn't a star at all. Modern historians suggest perhaps Jupiter and Saturn just got a bit too cozy in the sky, or a comet decided to photobomb the celestial scene, or maybe the Magi were just really good at party crashing. As the wise men finally kneel before a newborn smeared in hay, no heavenly harp music plays, just the gruff bleating of bewildered animals and the anxious whispers of a mother who just had the world's most famous baby. History note: while the star's exact nature remains a mystery, its story reminds us that in a pre-GPS era, cosmic events often made excellent excuses for long-distance travel and expensive gift-giving. So remember, when following a mysterious light in the sky, bring snacks, backup directions, and preferably a camel that loves to move. Otherwise, you might just end up lost in history without a nativity scene to show for it. Picture this: Bethlehem, circa 1 BC, a dusty town bustling with more drama than a reality show but zero Wi-Fi. The sun setting, casting awkward shadows over the sheep and the occasional disgruntled innkeeper who just got hit with the worst reservation snafu in history. The air smells faintly of hay, unwashed animals, and a hint of divine inevitability. Inside a crowded inn, Mary, visibly pregnant yet radiating calm, or the exhausted kind of calm, stands beside Joseph, who's frantically juggling a donkey, luggage, and a growing sense of existential dread. The innkeeper, a man with a face that says he's seen one too many unwelcome guests, offers a polite smile as he gestures toward nothing. Rooms are full. The only available accommodation, a stable, which no one really wants to call a hotel, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. Now, here's the culinary centerpiece of this particular fiasco. A manger piled high not with festive feasts of choice, but with hay so prickly it would make a mattress factory furious. No gingerbread, no figs, just dry, scratchy plant matter, and whatever dust bunnies had taken up residence. As Mary and Joseph prepare to settle into their 5-star hay service, tension bubbles. In Bethlehem, superstitions run as rampant as camels on a sand dune. There's a whisper that hay in a manger isn't just humble, It's an ancient test of patience and endurance. If you survive a night without a sneeze attack, perhaps you're blessed. If not, well, let's just say the local midwives might surreptitiously check for signs of divine intervention or mild hay fever. Meanwhile, Joseph attempts the age-old ritual known as the donkey unload, a delicate balance of preventing any sudden donkey rebellions while keeping Mary's luggage intact. At one point, a particularly ornery camel saunters by, eyeing the stable with what can only be described as judgment. Suddenly, the climax, just as Mary closes her eyes to rest. Ding, ding, ding. A chorus of sneezes explodes like biblical thunder. The hay, it turns out, was laced with an extraordinarily potent dose of ancient allergens. Joseph's loud snorts and the donkey's rhythmic braying add a comedic soundtrack befitting this historic sleepover. But here's the twist. That prickly pile of hay, uncomfortable as it is, becomes the cradle of history's most famous baby. No plush cradle, no designer linens, just raw humanity and a hint of medieval nasal irritation. Historically speaking, while nativity scenes often smooth over this detail, the reality is life was far less glamorous and far more sneezy. It's the original rustic chic, minus the Instagram filters. So what's the lesson in all this? When life hands you full inns and scratchy hay, just remember, sometimes the holy moments come wrapped in the worst accommodation. Picture this: Bethlehem, roughly 2,000 years ago, under a starry Middle Eastern sky that probably had more dust than celestial sparkle. Its population jittery with census paperwork, the city is bursting at the seams like a camel after too many fig pastries. The year? Oh, around the time when GPS was non-existent, and asking for directions usually resulted in a scolding or a fire-breathing local. Our ardent travelers, Mary and Joseph, arrive with subtle fanfare consisting of exhausted sighs, a persistent donkey, and a growing baby bump that screams, "Urgent accommodations needed." Guests flock to the inns, or more accurately, the one inn's lobby packed tighter than the last day sale at the market bazaar. The lighting is dim. A few oil lamps flicker, smoke curls and mixes with the scent of sweat, dried figs, and the unmistakable musk of ancient animals. Somewhere a goat complains noisily, which definitely isn't a Christmas carol. Key player 1, Joseph, a carpenter with a demeanor somewhere between hopeful and resigned, wielding his carpentry skills like a last-ditch bargaining chip. Key player 2, Mary, radiating a calm that suggests she's either incredibly patient or secretly planning world domination through motherhood. And let's not forget the donkey, the unsung hero forced to endure more stops than a tardy city bus. But what's at the heart of this lodging fiasco? The manger, essentially the stable's equivalent of a cozy Airbnb, except instead of welcoming guests, it offers hay, animal droppings, and questionable hygiene standards. This simple trough becomes a VIP suite by default. Now, tensions rise. Inns are full, rooms are non-existent, and the informally organized social services network is nowhere to be found. The absurdity is palpable. Mary's dignity gently shoved aside by the impossible quest for a bed, coupled with Joseph's futile attempts to persuade innkeepers, who treat him like he's asking for a royal upgrade rather than a humble room. The local superstition buzzes. Pregnant women in public inns might attract unwelcome spirits, or worse, cause the stock of dates to spoil. A whispered rumor even suggests the innkeeper believes this visitor to be a tax inspector, given the timing of the census and all. Amidst the chaos, Mary gracefully accepts the inevitable, bedding down in a stable, the olfactory disaster zone. Lights dim, animals shuffle nervously, and the only sound is the soft lullaby of a camel clearing its throat. The twist? That manger, intended for fodder, becomes the cradle of history's most influential home birth. An ironic nod to humble beginnings with gala, celestial fanfare to come. Historically speaking, Bethlehem wasn't the bustling metropolis later romanticized by holiday cards, but a small village with an over-enthusiastic census taker. The hotel industry? Non-existent. Travel-weary? Absolutely. Sanitation? Let's just say the phrase room service didn't mean what it does now. So what's the takeaway from this stable jamboree? Never underestimate the charm of a hay-filled trough. Sometimes the poshest digs are just a matter of perspective. Also, if you're ever looking for room during a government-mandated housing crunch, lower your expectations and the year is approximately 4 BC. The place, a dusty Bethlehem stable that somehow passed the HGTV inspection for rustic authenticity, yet completely failed on the privacy standard. The scene opens with the humble surroundings bathed in a glow so warm it could only come from the combined body heat of awkward animals and panicked parents-in-law. The air is a pungent cocktail of hay dust, donkey breath, and an underlying note of missed prenatal yoga. This is no ordinary night for Mary and Joseph. They are about to host history's most famous birth, with everyone invited to a barnyard party no one planned. As the family scrambles for a place to set the soon-to-arrive bundle of joy, the key characters are introduced. Mary, glowing with maternal resolve and a hint of what can only be described as existential fatigue. Joseph, the perennial supportive partner, whose facial expressions oscillate between awe, exhaustion, and mild confusion, and a cast of livestock who, frankly, were not consulted about their role in this event but seem resigned to their debut as living furniture. At the center of this unplanned chaos, a manger. Not exactly the luxury crib registry option, but what can you do when every inn is booked due to an inconvenient census? Tension mounts as Joseph struggles with the logistics of crafting a makeshift birthing suite amidst an audience of barnyard onlookers and curious shepherds who have apparently never heard of social distancing or personal space. Ancient superstitions hover in the air like fog. A pregnant woman giving birth outside a proper home was considered a recipe for celestial mishaps or, worse, neighborhood gossip that could last generations. The shepherd's sheep whisperer ritual, involving rhythmic bleating and a questionable olive oil anointment, adds an extra layer of absurdity to the birthing soundtrack. Meanwhile, the food of the hour is not the usual festive fare, but rather a hastily assembled assortment of stale bread and goat cheese, shared under the starry sky by the visitors who clearly had no idea this was an impromptu labor party. The occasional, startled neigh from a donkey punctuates the tension, as if the animal itself is questioning the sanity of this divine intervention. Just when the atmosphere threatens to tip into full-blown farce, enter the twist. Instead of panic, the miraculous occurs. Jesus is born, and the whole motley gathering somehow manages to keep a straight face long enough to welcome him without a single braying interruption. This peaceful moment, surprisingly free of the chaos that could have easily overshadowed it, transforms the stressful barnyard into a tableau of serene historical significance. Historically, the humble birth setting was less about marketing and more about harsh realities. Census-induced lodging shortages and the paucity of hospitable accommodations in a small town. But let's be honest, a royal birth in a palace just wouldn't have the same rustic charm or fodder for nativity scenes that spawn every holiday season. So what did we learn? When life gives you an overbooked town and 0 hotel rooms, improvise a maternity ward, invite some local shepherds, and remember, the best crib is often the one that's totally unexpected. Because nothing says peaceful Christmas quite like a cosmic event shared with a donkey and a very exhausted couple. Picture this: Bethlehem, circa 4 BC. The air is crisp, with a dash of livestock eau de toilette and a soundtrack of bleating sheep and nervous donkey brays. Lighting? Flickering oil lamps doing their best to illuminate a stable that doubles as the worst Airbnb of the millennium. The starry sky overhead tries hard to outshine the drumroll of impending political chaos, though honestly, stars have little say in Caesar's census plans. At center stage is a manger, not exactly a throne, but currently the hottest venue in town. Enter our key players. Joseph, a carpenter with the patience of a saint due to be tested. His wife, Mary, glowing like the original influencer but with less Instagram and more divine intervention, and a cast of barnyard animals collectively wondering what all the fuss is about. The food? Well, the only banquet here is crusty bread and water served with a side of anxiety. But don't be fooled by the humble feast. It's about to inspire a rescheduling of royal decrees and birth announcements that would make even the most seasoned town crier blink. Now, the census itself is a bureaucratic circus with echoes of today's DMV madness. Only imagine the line extending from Nazareth to Bethlehem without a single Starbucks in sight. Joseph and Mary's journey to comply got tangled with the odd customs officer demanding proof of ancestry as if lineage could be faxed overnight. Meanwhile, the local inns reach their capacity quickly, leading to the kind of overcrowding that makes a rush-hour subway look like a peaceful retreat. That is when the stable claims its spot in history, not out of preference but necessity, and perhaps a subtle hint the divine has a quirky sense of irony. Adding to the absurdity, shepherds nearby are instructed by an angelic flash mob, a heavenly choir with lighting creds and unexpected pop choreography, announcing the birth with the subtlety of a celestial New Year's Eve ball drop. The shepherd's response? Confused disbelief followed by a reluctant pilgrimage, their doubts mingling with curiosity like a well-mixed cocktail. In a twist worthy of any Shakespearean comedy, the political decree intended to control populations inadvertently ensures a property shortage that leads to the most peaceful, yet cramped, Christmas delivery ever recorded. Add to this an entourage of wise men who miss the memo on timing, turning what should have been a quick check-in into a drawn-out diplomatic visit involving exotic gifts and a lot of back and forth about gold's market value. Historical context: the Roman Empire's knack for census-taking was less about data and more about tax collecting, a reminder that even empire builders love a good spreadsheet. Meanwhile, Bethlehem, despite its modest accommodations, became forever immortalized, not for its hospitality, but for the birth event that managed to start as quietly as a whisper and end as loudly as a global holiday. So what's the takeaway from this nativity nook? When the Empire schedules a census, expect the unexpected, especially if you're carrying divine cargo and prefer your accommodations rustic. Lesson learned? Even the humblest stable can outshine the grandest palace when the guest list includes miracles, sheep, and the original peace on earth. All right, folks, buckle up for a journey back to a not-so-glamorous corner of the ancient world. The year is approximately 4 BC. The place a charmingly overcrowded town called Bethlehem, Pop, somewhere between Cattle Crush and Sandwich Shop Apocalypse. The scene: a stable that smells like equal parts hay, donkey, and desperate hopes. Picture this: dim lanterns flickering, casting more shadows than light, mingled with the robust aroma of manure and the faint whoosh of a camel settling in. The background score is a live loop of cooing pigeons, grumbling oxen, and Mary muttering about the hospitality skills of innkeepers. Our characters? Mary and Joseph, the original dream team, slightly bewildered but resolutely calm. Then, the livestock, a donkey with a face that says, "I'm here for my paycheck," an ox who looks tired of all this fame, and a sheep that's probably plotting a breakout. The culinary star of this episode? The humble date fruit, the only snack within a 3-mile radius. Sticky and sweet, but just as elusive as a quiet night in Bethlehem. Now, here's where things get interesting, or at least historically confusing. Enter the bizarre, borderline comical world of manger economies, where the price of a handful of dates could cause more drama than a Roman Senate debate. Demand exceeded supply. Folks were trading ration coupons like stock certificates. Joseph is overheard murmuring about market stabilization while trying to hustle a few barley loaves to the crowd. Amid this, the real stressors emerge. Local superstitions that the arrival of a child born in a stable might upset the cosmic balance. People insisted on blessings from wandering astrologers who can barely read their own star charts and rituals involving sheep droppings, since nothing says good luck like fertilizer. By midnight, tension boils when a particularly savvy sheep negotiates a better pen placement, causing the livestock labor union to threaten a strike. Mary tries to keep calm. Joseph frantically checks his scrolls for any ancient advice on livestock relations management. The twist? The much-anticipated celestial announcement isn't a booming proclamation, but a series of confused sheep baas, an enthusiastic donkey bray, and a star that winks at exactly the wrong moment, blinding a few early novices. Historically speaking, shepherds likely weren't waiting for dramatic signs, but rather eager to finish their rounds before dawn. The wise men? More like GPS-challenged travelers on a long detour. So, what's our takeaway? If you ever find yourself in a crowded stable playing the role of a peace bringer, remember, master your animal bargaining skills, keep your snack game strong, and never underestimate the economic power of date. The stage is set. Bethlehem, circa 2,000 years ago, give or take a few dusty scrolls. The night is calm, the stars are twinkling like they own the place, and somewhere just off-screen a camel is having an existential crisis about its role in this whole saga. Amid the dry air scented faintly with hay and the distant bleating of sheep, we find ourselves at a humble stable, the most inconvenient real estate in town for a birth that will literally change everything. Its lighting is minimal, just a rustic lantern swinging precariously, and the occasional glow from a suspiciously bright celestial spotlight that would make any modern stage director jealous. Enter our key players. Mary, the exhausted superstar Mom Tobe. Joseph, the part-time carpenter, full-time wandering philosopher. And a supporting cast of barnyard animals willing to star in any nativity show for a snack. At center stage lies the food of the evening, a modest pile of straw that will later double as bedding and the unofficial king of humble accommodations. But wait, before the star baby makes his debut, tensions run high. Local inns are booked solid, presumably due to a town-wide event that some historians suspect was just terrible Yelp reviews and a desperate shortage of Airbnb. Joseph frantically knocks door after door, while Mary deftly avoids any dramatic contractions because timing is everything. Adding to the absurdity, the stable is a hotbed of ancient superstitions. Camels suspected of being celestial spies, sheep believed to whisper secrets to the stars, and an innkeeper with a suspiciously cheery smile that screams, "I've never met a pregnant refugee I didn't exploit." The highlight? A series of slightly chaotic animal noises that suspiciously synchronize with Mary's favorite labor playlist. Hush, Little Baby, performed live. Then, in a twist worthy of the most dramatic reality shows, the infamous manger, typically just a feeding trough, is crowned the birthplace of peace, hope, and arguably the world's earliest example of minimalist design. As the baby Jesus makes his entrance, the animals hush, the celestial spotlight swells, and the absurdity of a star guiding not kings, but rather a trio of bewildered shepherds and possibly confused astrologers unfolds. Historical footnote: while the manger scene is iconic, historical records on actual locations are as solid as Camel's loyalty in a desert sandstorm. The romanticized version owes much to centuries of tradition, creative license, and the occasional weary tourist pamphlet. So, what did this birth teach us? When you're low on hotel options and high on divine expectations, sometimes all you get is a crib that doubles as a snack tray. Moral of the story? Always scout your maternity wards ahead of time, and never underestimate the power of a well-placed star, especially if it's borrowed from a special effects budget. The scene opens at 2200 hours in a stuffy Judean town called Bethlehem, known less for its festival cheer and more for its inconveniently full inns and a suspiciously jiggly donkey. The air is thick with the aroma of overworked camels and reeking sandals, while an unlucky innkeeper practicing his grumpiest face prepares for what he hopes will be just another boring night. Enter Joseph and Mary, starring roles in an ancient drama about to unfold, but inconveniently lacking any reservation or Yelp review to smooth the process. The lighting is dim, lit by flickering oil lamps that cast shadows resembling misunderstood ancient selfies. The sounds? A mix of bewildered sheep, a lute player probably regretting his career choices, and the soft moan of Mary, who's decidedly ready for the baby's debut. The key characters are a weary Joseph, a heavily pregnant Mary, the ever-judgmental innkeeper, and a cast of questionable stable animals whose personal hygiene definitely isn't going to inspire a health inspector's visit. At the center of this rustic chaos is the manger, a humble wooden trough laden with hay but serving as the era's equivalent of a five-star baby suite. The supposed peaceful birthplace doubles as a stable, where livestock and divinity collide in a symphony of hay dust and questionable smells. tension mounts as the innkeeper scrutinizes every corner of his establishment with the enthusiasm of a tax collector on payday. Ancient superstitions swirled amidst the crisp night air. Offering sanctuary to divine visitors could either bless your business or have your inn declared a spiritual health hazard. Meanwhile, Joseph nervously jokes about their odds of finding any room, a conversation so old it predates the Advent calendar. To the audience's delight and the innkeeper's dismay, Mary's labor signals a pressing urgency that literally knocks at the gates of historical hospitality norms. Quirky rituals unfold. The innkeeper debates whether it's sacrilege or just bad business to clean the stable before the VIP arrival. The animals, sensing the human fuss, contribute their own chorus of curious grunts and startled hooves. The tension is punctuated by Mary delivering her baby on a bed of hay, while the innkeeper contemplates whether he'll ever get a decent review on Scrolls.com. The unexpected twist? The guest book for the night remains blank, but the manger gains the status not by hospitality standards, but by divine decree. The innkeeper, initially perturbed, enjoys a sudden surge in posthumous fame as his humble stable becomes the backdrop of countless nativity scenes. Historically speaking, the notion of overcrowded inns and last-minute room shortages is a delightful fiction crafted centuries later, likely inspired by the logistics nightmares of ancient travelers and the timeless human experience of bad hotel management. So what did this segment teach us? Even when history's written with divine flair, never underestimate the power of a cranky innkeeper and the PR value of a manger. Remember, too, that when life gives you a crowded inn, sometimes the only room you need is one with hay and a very patient donkey. Picture this. Bethlehem, circa 2,000 years ago, just a few weeks before the most peaceful, if a bit cramped, Christmas ever. The census decree has traveled faster than the latest camel gossip, forcing every Judean to scramble for accommodations. The scene is a dimly lit, dusty stable with an aroma that is less Christmas cinnamon and more Aoda livestock. The soundtrack? A mix of restless sheep, occasional donkey brays, and the muffled bargaining of innkeepers who've just run out of rooms. Enter Joseph and Mary, the ultimate last-minute travelers, lugging their RSVP for Emperor Augustus's census and a visibly pregnant woman who's been denied every inn from here to Nazareth. The centerpiece of this well-orchestrated holiday fiasco? A manger. Not the deluxe kind with velvet cushions and heating. Just a humble trough filled with straw and enough hay to choke a small child, which Mary stares at as if pondering the existential curse of travel upgrades. Why such tension? Well, in a world without Booking.com, finding a bed meant playing a high-stakes game of hospitality roulette. Inns overbooked. Landlords suspicious of strangers, especially those with peculiar birth announcements and angelic visitations. Plus a dash of paranoia that any newcomer might be the local tax collector in disguise. Add to that the taboo around stable dwellings that conjure images of animal perfumes far less festive than chestnut roasting. There's also a peculiar superstition floating about that a child born in a stable would inherit a messy destiny, which did little to ease Mary's worries or Joseph's growing sense of emergency obstetrics under pressure. The tension reaches a boiling point when a crotchety innkeeper delivers the ultimate rebuff. no room at the inn, in a tone that suggests Mary might just be the first woman in history to be turned away from hospitality with divine irony. But wait for it, the twist. The humble stable is suddenly graced not just by barnyard critters, but by the arrival of animals that seem to be playing extras in a holy nativity reenactment. Donkeys, sheep, and a very unimpressed ox provide the unexpected ambient cast, setting the scene for a birth that literally puts everyone, including the innkeeper, on notice. Historical context. While the Bible paints this as a cozy barn scene full of humility, scholars remind us that the term inn might just mean a family home with no spare rooms, turning this legendary birth into an ancient version of the worst Airbnb experience ever. To wrap up this segment, festive catastrophe here is your fake lesson. When the Empire demands your presence and your Airbnb fails spectacularly, you too might have to settle for a stable berth and a manger-side crib. After all, nothing says peace on our earth like fielding angelic announcements amidst farm animals and dodging innkeeper rejection with a smile that says, all part of cue the scene. It is the year zero-ish, somewhere around the dusty outskirts of Bethlehem, where the air is a potent mix of hay, sweat, and the faint scent of overworked camels. The time is night, very quiet except for the occasional bray of an irritated donkey and the low mumble of bewildered shepherds who have been advised repeatedly by glowing heavenly beings to get some rest. Our stage is set inside the least glamorous lodging establishment of the ancient world, a makeshift stable that is less five-star inn and more barn with a bad Yelp review. The lighting, honestly, it's mostly firelight and a critically important yet questionably placed star overhead that has upstaged every Christmas light display to come. The scent is that glorious combination of hay, animal musk, and hope. Sounds include mooing cows with zero chill and occasional startled squeaks from the resident vermin. Enter Mary and Joseph, a young couple who, despite having a due date for what may be the most famous birth in history, are navigating what modern audiences would call the ultimate Airbnb nightmare. Mary, heavily pregnant and glowing with a tired sort of radiance, is doing her best to maintain composure, while Joseph juggles the roles of concerned husband, amateur handyman, and master of polite small talk with the indifferent animals. The center of this chaotic hospitality is no festive feast or fine wines, but humble manger fodder, where the newborn Jesus is destined to have his first audience: cows, sheep, and maybe a very curious ox whose insurance coverage is questionable at best. Tension mounts, not because of any political intrigue or palace coup, but due to a desperate shortage of clean sleeping arrangements and baffling ancient hygiene standards that would horrify modern germaphobes. The characters perform an improvised ritual of swaddling, calming the infant, and courage, lots of courage, while secretly hoping they don't catch anything worse than barnyard flu. Superstitious whispers float through the air like dust motes. Was that a sign from above, or just a particularly loud donkey? The shepherds who arrive with their questionable sheep pelts bring their own brand of gospel and gossip, making the event part spiritual summit, part rustic networking event. And then, just when it seems like the tension might crack under the weight of overcrowded animals and endless sand, a twist. The star above does a surprise cameo, illuminating the scene with such awkward brilliance that it causes the sheep to scatter in every direction, adding a slapstick element to the sacred event. Historical context? Well, Bethlehem at that moment was less what you see in year-round Christmas pageants and more a crowded, smelly little town dealing with an inconvenient census. And that stable? Probably not what live nativity sets would want you to believe. More likely a cave or lower room behind a family home. Definitely not the holiday-themed petting zoo ambiance we enjoy today. So, what do we learn from this? That even the most peaceful Christmas retelling involves dealing with poor hospitality, an audience of livestock, and a star that just can't take a hint. The real lesson: in history, comfort was optional, but awkwardness was guaranteed. The year is approximately 4 BCE, give or take a celestial miscalculation, and the spotlights or starlights have been pointed squarely on a rustic stable somewhere near Bethlehem, where the atmospheric conditions are less snow globe, more hay hovel, complete with the distinct aroma of livestock and the faintest whiff of unwashed shepherds. The soundtrack is a curious blend of sheep bleats, occasional donkeys braying off-key, and the ever-dramatic rustling of straw. Here, our key players gather. Mary, whose glowing pregnancy glow is powered by a mix of divine intervention and, well, nerves. Joseph, the ever-vigilant carpenter moonlighting as an amateur astronomer, and a curious trio of shepherds whose primary skill is crowd control for sheep. At center stage, the humble manger, serving as an improvised cradle and the ultimate symbol of DIY maternity ward chic. The lighting is dim but intimate, flickering from a single oil lamp that threatens to sputter out at any moment, much like the patience of Joseph as he tries to assemble a crib without YouTube tutorials. The stable smells of hay, droppings, and a hint of nearby frankincense, which, frankly, does little to mask the aroma of barnyard funk. Enter the Magi, those legendary wise men who've navigated the ancient GPS-guiding puzzling star and somehow managed to get lost in a caravan for days, all for the sake of some ancient bling: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The three gifts that sound suspiciously like an infomercial bundle. Tension builds not from political intrigue or Roman threats, but rather from an unexpected source: stargazing paranoia. Whispers circulate among the shepherds that the star isn't a divine sign, but a runaway lantern from a particularly forgetful caravan guard, an omen of cosmic negligence. Mary suspects maybe it's just a highly elaborate pregnancy-craving hallucination. Joseph checks his carpenter's level to confirm everything is stable. But even his usual faith wavers under the suspiciously perfect alignment of celestial bodies. Amid this cosmic confusion unfolds a peculiar ritual. Shepherds attempting to interpret the star's meaning with the accuracy of a fortune cookie, while the Magi debate the best way to wrap extravagant gifts without modern wrapping paper. Meanwhile, the animals add an unwitting layer of chaos as the donkey kicks over a lamp and the sheep stage an impromptu Beethoven symphony to cover the confusion. And then, the twist. The star, after all this fuss, turns out to be not a divine sign, but simply Venus playing peekaboo with Jupiter in a cosmic dance misread by every stargazer and shepherd alike. The baby Jesus, unfazed by planetary politics, opts for a quiet debut with zero fanfare beyond the occasional bovine snort. The wise men arrive fashionably late, gifts slightly jumbled but well-intended. The shepherds resume their sheep wrangling with newfound skepticism about celestial events. Historically speaking, the timing of Jesus' birth has baffled scholars. partly because the census lore clashes with astronomical evidence and partly because ancient stargazing was as much about luck as it was science. And while wise men and shepherds surely missed their cues more often than they nailed them, one thing remains certain. Christmas was born in a barn with less pomp and far more hay. So what's the moral of this star-studded saga? Sometimes, the biggest cosmic events are just planetary photobombs, and if you want a peaceful birth story, make sure your star isn't just a celestial prankster in disguise. Picture this. Bethlehem, somewhere around 4 BC, a stable with less charm and more hay dust than you'd expect, and a newborn star destined to outshine every other infant, at least according to some very enthusiastic astrologers. It's a night so bright Mary and Joseph probably wished for some blackout curtains. But instead, they got a barn full of bleating livestock and the aroma of slightly fermented olives wafting through the air. The lighting? Imagine a flickering oil lamp struggling valiantly against a ravenous swarm of moths. Enter Mary, serene yet understandably exhausted, and Joseph, knockoff carpenter and part-time crisis manager, both now involuntarily landlords of a prime piece of real estate that was supposed to be occupied by animals and not divine babies. Meanwhile, the stars align, literally, and shepherds in the nearby fields perform what can only be described as the earliest recorded group panic when heavenly choirs belt out carols louder than the local nightlife. Let's not forget the pièce de résistance, the manger itself. Not just a feeding trough, but the humble centerpiece of an accidental nativity scene, serving as a crib with less cushioning than your average airport seat. And the food? Oh yes, at the very heart of this pastoral drama lies a loaf of unleavened bread, probably stale, definitely dusty, but cherished as the main form of nourishment amidst the chaos. Now, tensions rise as superstition grips the crowd. Some believe that eating bread baked without yeast could ward off Roman tax collectors, while others whisper that eating too much unleavened bread might transform you into a pillar of salt. Between the bleats of impatient sheep and the suspicious glances of nearby goats, the crowd edges nervously around this precarious foodstuff. Local midwives consult herbalists for quick remedies, while Joseph contemplates whether a shepherd's staff could double as a defensive weapon in case of any tax raid. Then, just when the paranoia peaks, a wandering wise man steps forward. Not with gifts to barter or gold to flaunt, but a sarcastic quip about how the entire setup might just be the most overrated real estate listing in history. Suddenly, the loaf is declared perfectly safe, perhaps even delicious if you squint hard enough. The animals, sensing the drop in tension, resume their low-key symphony of snores and snorts. The shepherds, now reassured, sit down for an impromptu snack session on what might be the first recorded Christmas dinner. So, what can we gather from this? Never underestimate the power of a dusty loaf during a crisis, or the diplomatic skills of a humble father balancing real estate woes with impending world-changing events. Remember, even a manger. Picture this. Bethlehem, circa 1 BC. A quiet town with a population just barely enough to fill a decent-sized family reunion, yet bustling enough to make a palace guard consider early retirement and a career in pottery. The scene is a humble stable with a distinct scent combo of hay, manure, and something suspiciously like burnt incense. a souvenir from last week's botched temple ritual. Outside, the stars are twinkling, but not in a peaceful way, more like spectators at the world's first outdoor reality show. Inside, we meet our key players. Mary, whose patience is being tested by about 7 layers of unwelcome pregnancy discomfort. Joseph, the proud carpenter whose career just got interestingly complicated by divine intervention, and a cast of livestock ranging from an unamused donkey to a sheep that clearly missed its meditation session. The food du jour, a modest mix of barley bread and dried figs, ambrosia for the ancient palate, but a potential trigger for any unfortunate parasites. Now, here's where the absurdity kicks in. In a town where inns are already overbooked because of a census no one asked for, the stable becomes the premier venue. And not just any stable. Oh no. This stable has been the subject of local rumors involving ghostly noises and the mysterious disappearance of a prized goat. The townsfolk, fiercely superstitious as any community reliant on astrology charts and goat entrails, firmly believed the manger was cursed, but shrugged it off because, well, where else is a pregnant woman supposed to crash? Tension rises as Mary tries to settle in amidst the critters. The donkey persistently brays for reasons best left to veterinary psychologists. Joseph debates the wisdom of this entire arrangement while simultaneously defending their choice from passing shepherds who cast concerned glances and whisper about Omen P and the End Times subscription. Adding to the chaos, the dried figs, supposed to be a snack, trigger an allergy in the local camel tethered outside, sparking a minor stampede that almost overturns the whole setup. The scene is a cacophony of braying, baaing, and nasal observational comments. Traditional rituals call for the blessing of livestock on nights like these, a ceremony involving less singing and more frantic swatting of flies, which somehow becomes a symbolic gesture for peace, or at least a truce with the local insects. Just when the tension reaches maximum absurdity, enter the angels, a heavenly flash mob that is less choir and more full-blown light show, complete with a soundtrack rich in celestial glissandos. Their arrival temporarily distracts everyone from the chaotic farmyard and the debating camel, culminating in the unexpected and frankly delightful twist that the animals appear to be the calmest, most reverent crowd in attendance. A reminder that sometimes peace comes on 4 legs and with a tail. Historically speaking, stables were indeed humble shelters, not 5-star inns. Also, livestock and famine were a constant tag team in antiquity, so having a newborn amidst bumbling animals probably ensured plenty of stories but not a lot of sleep. The real star, however, remains the message of hope, delivered with the kind of peace only achievable when the food allergies don't escalate, and the donkey refrains from a mid-sermon solo. So, the takeaway? Hosting a royal birth in a stable guarantees unforgettable guest interactions. And if you ever find yourself amidst a sarcastic donkey and snack-hating camels, just remember, the year is approximately 4 BCE, give or take a few years. Historical records are about as precise as a camel trying to moonwalk. The place, a nondescript, somewhat dusty town in Judea called Bethlehem, famed for its overcrowded inns and a star that suspiciously resembles a celestial disco ball. Picture a twilight sky smeared with stardust and the aroma of slightly burnt frankincense, mingling with the earthy scent of barn animals, a perfect mixture of holy and hay. Lanterns flicker with an unsteady glow, while the distant bleating of sheep competes with Mary's increasingly urgent mutterings about finding a place to rest. Joseph, meanwhile, juggles a pregnant spouse and an RSVP list longer than his patience, all while trying to spot any innkeeper who looks remotely welcoming. Enter the inn, or rather, the lack of one. The townsfolk have heard the royal census brought a tide of visitors, which means every decent room has been swapped for a makeshift stable, or worse, a cousin's basement, which, in Bethlehem, translates to less plumbing and more inspiration for creative lodging complaints. The food? Well, the feast tonight is a humble mix of stale barley and olives offered by well-meaning neighbors. Not the multi-course miracles you'd expect, but the real culinary star is the strange collective nervousness around the communal trough, where the animals eye the budding family with an elderly donkey's suspicious glare that could curdle milk in stall time. Tension simmers like a pot left too long on the fire. Why? 'Cause in a town gearing up for a census, privacy is as rare as a miracle, and everyone's vying for the best corner of the manger real estate. Local superstition holds that a baby born among animals ensures a lifetime subscription to humility and hay fever. The innkeepers fear divine retribution in the form of explosive livestock. Somewhat understandable if you witnessed the aftermath of last year's goat incident. Ancient Bethlehem customs dictate that any unexpected maternity must be met with a curious mix of hospitality and strategic avoidance. Joseph finds himself navigating a checklist of social protocols. No shouting, minimal complaints about smells, and above all, don't let the baby see the goats. Rumor has it, the beasts have a wicked sense of timing. Just when it seems the night will end with Joseph in a smelly corner contemplating the exact wrong choice of lodging, the humble manger plays its trump card. Instead of a luxurious bed, the newborn's cradle is a feeding trough. Perhaps not the Ritz-Carlton, but a 5-star endorsement from any donkey or ox with taste. Here's the twist. Far from a scandal, this rustic arrangement becomes the ultimate seal of cosmic chill. The animals, seemingly aware of their starring roles, oppose with stoic grace fit for any nativity postcard. And the star? That celestial disco ball keeps sparkling as if winking at a cosmic joke only it understands. Historically speaking, while the Bible doesn't actually mention innkeepers turning them away, the overcrowding is well documented in Roman census records, which, interestingly, are some of the oldest known examples of bureaucratic nightmare-induced hospitality crises. So what's the takeaway from Bethlehem's first hospitality nightmare? When life gives you no room at the inn, make yourself at home in the barn. Bonus points if the donkey approves. Because truly, sometimes the humblest beginnings come with the loftiest celestial reservations. The scene opens on a chilly night in Bethlehem, circa 4 BC, where the rustic charm of a dimly lit stable meets the subtle aroma of hay and a rather confused farm animal ensemble. Above, the stars twinkle with the kind of celestial enthusiasm usually reserved for soap opera finales. Our key players tonight? A heavily pregnant Mary, her stoic yet mildly panicked husband Joseph, and a guest list that would make any modern hotel manager weep, including a trio of wise men who have been navigating by star and ancient Google Maps for quite some time. The centerpiece of this humble accommodation debacle? a manger which, despite its pastoral innocence, might as well have been a luxury suite considering the hotel's overbooking crisis. Tension simmers as Joseph frantically searches for a room in every inn in town, only to face the dreaded rejection sign plastered across every door, no vacancy. In a world without online booking or Yelp reviews, reputation was everything, and apparently no one was taking walk-ins or heavily pregnant women with labor signs. Meanwhile, local townsfolk engage in curious Christmas Eve rituals, including loudly speculating why anyone would choose a barn over more conventional lodgings. Rumor had it Mary had a thing for rustic vibes. Superstitions run high. Some whisper that a star-studded birth foretells cataclysmic shifts in regional power. Others worry the animals are conspiring to steal the spotlight. As the night deepens, even the sheep seem to watch with bated breath, unsure if they're about to witness the dawn of history or just another messy stable squabble. Then, just when it seems the night's chaos will never settle, a comedic twist. The donkey, previously silent and unimpressed, decides to bray loudly enough to startle the neighborhood dogs into an impromptu choir, effectively announcing the arrival of the newborn in the most unceremonious yet unforgettable way possible. This unexpected serenade breaks the tension, drawing in a few curious shepherds who had been suspiciously napping nearby. Historically speaking, the idea of a royal birth in such humble surrounds wasn't just a logistical nightmare, but a tight narrative strategy designed to portray divinity cloaked in humility, a marketing campaign perfected over 2 millennia. The moral of this segment? When life gives you no room at the inn, turn a manger into the hottest venue in town, and all the stage is set. The year roughly 0, give or take a decade, somewhere in the chaotic town of Bethlehem, famed not for its hospitality, but its remarkably underprepared Airbnb scene. The place? A somewhat questionable stable, where the smell of hay meets the occasional whiff of disgruntled livestock. An ambiance that screams 5 stars if you're a camel, but 2 camels shy of comfort if you're a newborn. Lighting. A single flickering oil lamp strategically placed next to what looks like a manger, doubling as an impromptu bassinet. The sounds? A soothing symphony of lowing cows, the occasional braying donkey, and Mary softly humming what might be the earliest recorded lullaby, or possibly just trying to drown out Joseph's nervous muttering about plumbing. In the starring roles, Mary glowing with that miraculous pregnancy sheen and a surprising tolerance for discomfort. Joseph, doing his best impression of the original millennial trying to find parking in a no-vacancy zone, and the cattle, utterly unimpressed. Now, the food. Not your typical festive fare of roast goose or honey cakes. No, this Christmas dinner revolves around something much humbler and infinitely more perilous. A trough of slightly questionable camel feed that doubles as the newborn's crib. Bed and breakfast, Bethlehem style. As night deepens, tension simmers. Legends foretold of the birth. Shepherds glide nervously around in sandals ill-suited to the rocky terrain, and starry-eyed magi are en route, probably stuck in traffic or stalled at customs. Superstition surrounds the manger like a fog. If the manger wobbles, it means the stars have misaligned. If the animals start a riot, it signals political upheaval. And if any humble visitor gets too close with impure thoughts, expect a celestial slap on the wrist. Joseph, ever the devoted but hapless protector, tries to make peace by bribing the donkey with extra hay, only exacerbating the tension when the donkey decides to express its displeasure by knocking over the oil lamp. Chaos ensues in slow motion. The oil lamp teeters. The startled animals react like they've just seen a ghost, and Mary tries to maintain a serene expression that would give even the stoniest Roman censor pause. And then the grand twist. The room, momentarily plunged into darkness, flickers back to light just as a chorus of unexpected guests arrive. Shepherds, the Magi, and possibly a curious cat who slipped in unnoticed, instantly stealing the scene. Total pandemonium turns to harmonious adoration. The Holy Night, with all its rustic imperfections, becomes an impromptu block party, celebrating the birth of the most famously peaceful infant in history. Historically, while nativity scenes tend to sanitize and romanticize, the real deal was probably more like a low-budget reality show, where hygiene took a sabbatical and lodging was booked at the last minute. Still, it's the chaos, not the calm, that sparked the enduring story. So what have we learned from this cribside drama? Even in the birth of holiness, comical chaos and modest accommodations are the true stars, proving that the year is, well, a little hard to pinpoint, somewhere between BC's chaotic empire shuffle and AD's introduction to annual gift shopping mania. The place? A somewhat nondescript stable just outside an overpopulated little town called Bethlehem, which definitely did not have a shortage of inns but somehow had a surplus of tranquility. Cue the birth scene. Dim lantern light flickering against hay-strewn walls, the faint but persistent aroma of farm animal funk blended with what faintly smells like unwashed shepherds, and a chorus of nocturnal animal noises that sound suspiciously like disgruntled moos and brays tuning up for the night's performance. Meet our key characters. Mary, glowing with the sort of calm one gets when you're about 9 months pregnant, and the father of your soon-to-be child is still trying to figure out how to dodge census duties. Joseph, whose main accomplishment so far is securing this lovely stable real estate after all inns politely declined due to, let's say, last-minute remodeling. And a host of shepherds and magi, who basically RSVP'd to the birth party after following some suspiciously bright star, and probably also because they heard there might be good gifts or at least a decent hay buffet. Now, the central foodstuff. No royal feast here. This is a humble, high-protein hay spread with the occasional root veggies donated by neighboring farms, which doubled as bedding for everyone, especially the livestock. The smell of hay is not universally loved, and the texture? Let's just say it's not winning any Michelin stars, but does wonders for digestive maintenance if you're a camel or a donkey. The tension? Well, in a stable like this, tensions are less about who ate the last bread and more about whether the animals will remember they share this space and not turn it into a stampede zone. The irony here? A peaceful Christmas retelling means everyone's supposed to be calm, yet the sheep keep bleating like they're auditioning for the loudest newborn baby contest. The shepherds, on the other hand, have been practicing their awe and respectful nodding, an ancient ritual akin to impressed murmurs, but with more head-scratching because, let's face it, it's not every night a divine birth interrupts your usual goat-watching shift. And then comes the absurdity of the Magi, traveling who knows so many miles, guided only by a celestial GPS named Star Tracker X, littered with questionable one-star reviews from other bewildered travelers. These 3 kings or wise men, though the term is debatable, sneak in like uninvited party guests, bearing gifts heavy enough to question the logistics of their carriage: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gifts that sound exotic but basically scream, "We brought you tax deductions, incense for mood setting, and embalming supplies. Trust us, future career preparedness is key." Cue the twist. After all the celestial fanfare and perfect calm, the scene ends not with a peaceful lullaby, but with a donkey sneezing explosively enough to startle everyone, knocking over a lantern, which promptly sets fire to the hay. The crowd panics, the shepherds scramble, and Joseph's heroic act involves smothering flames with his trusty shepherd's cloak. Peaceful, sort of, just in the we survived way. Historically, the story of Jesus' birth was about humble beginnings and profound hope, but the real takeaway might be that peace in a stable is more like organized chaos with better branding. So what do we learn from this peaceful Christmas saga? That no matter how sacred the occasion, if you invite livestock, random stargazers, and a fiery donkey to the party, peace might just be a bit overrated. Close your eyes and picture it. The dusty roads of Nazareth. The kind of mid-December afternoon that smells like sweaty donkeys and unwashed tunics, with just a hint of impending doom, because the empire says everyone must go home and get counted. Yes, it's 6 BC, the Roman Empire's way too happy attempt at population control, and boy, have they picked a great time for it. No smartphones, no comfy chariots, just lots of walking and excessively detailed paperwork. Our key players? Joseph, a carpenter whose business likely just got downgraded to part-time mule puller, and Mary, who is very much pregnant and definitely questioning her life choices. The focus of this segment's culinary drama? The all-important Jerusalem street food, fig cakes and some mysterious, possibly fermented grape juice. It's the ancient version of fast food with a side of unintentional hangover. The atmosphere crackles with the sound of distant taxes being calculated, a few braying donkeys sounding suspiciously like they're gossiping. The skies drape in an overcast gloom, offering the perfect lighting for the big journey filled with hope, mild irritation, and the scent of dust mixed with Mary's rather persistent morning sickness. Rituals here include the sacred art of dodging Roman centurions eager to check if you're registered, and an intense competition among townspeople for the last fig cake. Because nothing says survival like stale fig paste squeezed into an ancient wafer. Meanwhile, local rumors swirl that the census is a front for secret imperial plotting, and some suspect the grape juice might be spiked with extra Roman cynicism or just plain rot. The tension is palpable. Will Joseph make it to Bethlehem without collapsing? Will Mary find a room that isn't a stable? Will the last fig cake survive the day? Just when it seems that every minor delay and grumble could ignite an ancient version of modern traffic chaos, the twist: Bethlehem is so overcrowded because everyone's heard about the census, which means the entire region is there due to the same ridiculous mandate. The city looks less like a sacred birthplace and more like the worst Black Friday sale in 2 millennia. And for our humble fig cakes and grape juice, they are quickly devoured by a mob of tired travelers, proving that nothing reunites distant relatives like shared exhaustion and mildly questionable food. Historically speaking, the census under Quirinius was as much about tax collection as it was about asserting control, making the journey less a holy event and more a bureaucratic nightmare with a divine cameo. So maybe the lesson here is this: even when divine destiny calls, expect bad timing, terrible snacks. Picture this: Bethlehem, roughly 2,000 years ago, under a starry night so bright you could trip over a donkey without actually stepping in anything too unpleasant. The scent in the air? A heady mix of hay, animals, and just the faintest hint of too much overworked shepherds. Anxiety. Welcome to the apparent height of humble beginnings, a stable which locals insist is the hottest real estate for expecting mothers on a budget. Our key players: Mary, a woman whose patience is rivaled only by the camels outside; Joseph, a carpenter with a face that says, "I've definitely built better things," and a cast of barnyard extras including that relentlessly judgmental donkey who seems convinced Mary should be sprung for a room at the inn. At the center of our story is the infamous manger, now less a feeding trough and more the birthplace of religious holidays, wrapping contentions, and awkward family photos for millennia to come. As our scene unfolds, imagine the lighting: dim oil lamps casting flickering shadows onto dust motes performing their nightly ballet. The soundtrack consists of the occasional snort from a nearby ox, the subtle but persistent chirp of crickets who apparently missed the memo about sacred moments, and Mary softly humming a lullaby that could easily double as a subtle art critique of the rustic decor. The air is thick with the aroma of hay, mingled with the not-so-subtle whiff of, well, livestock. This is not your average Airbnb listing. Now, the tension. Why the stable rather than an inn? Because Bethlehem, packed tighter than a jar of pickled figs during census time, left no room for the weary travelers, especially one carrying the savior of mankind. It's a hospitality crisis wrapped in divine irony. Meanwhile, Joseph does his best impression of a man who left his anxiety in the carpenter's workshop but forgot to pick it up. And Mary? She's balancing imminent motherhood and the dubious honor of inaugurating the world's most basic crib. Meanwhile, the animals have their own rituals. The donkey occasionally brays in what sounds suspiciously like sarcasm, its way of sassing the celestial event, while the sheep trade nervous glances, clearly aware that everything about this night will be told and retold, embroidered with every known miracle over the centuries. The manger itself becomes a stage, the humble wooden basin elevated to a throne fit for legends, although underneath it, mud and straw compete fiercely for realism. Just when you think this could not get any more picturesque, a band of shepherds arrives, their arrival announced by a chorus of fireworks disguised as angelic choirs, clearly celestial PR in full swing. Turns out, rather than just lowering the crowded factor, this announcement further drives up the demand for guest appearances. Talk about a divine publicity stunt. In a twist worthy of the best sitcom writers, the guest list swells to include not just shepherds, but also wise men whose timing is suspiciously flexible, and gifts that utterly confuse the practical minds of those used to simple barn life. Frankincense and myrrh, helpful in ancient embalming and incense rituals, but handy for nurturing a newborn? Definitely a stretch. A little historical note. While tradition fastened this story to stables and starry nights, scholars speculate that nativity tales originally had multiple destinations, ranging from caves to private homes. But why settle for ordinary when the world can have a nativity with animals, mystery guests, and a star bright enough to give Vegas a run for its money? So the grand lesson from this mild winter night in a dusty corner of the world? Even the humblest beginnings have a flair for drama, proving that sometimes you just need a little hay, a dash of chaos, and a celestial PR team. Picture it. Bethlehem, the year 1 BC, late December. Somewhere between low-light mood setting and dungeon chic. The stable is lit by a single flickering lantern that sputters more than it illuminates, while the faint aroma of hay mixed with, well, let's just call it rustic eau de barn, wafts in the chilly air. The soundtrack. An awkward chorus of sleepy animals, sheep bleating their displeasure, donkeys braying off-key, and the choir of crickets trying to drown out the cacophony. In this poor but pious setting, meet the key players. Mary, glowing not so much from the Holy Spirit, but from 3 sharp nights with no proper rest. Joseph, pulling off the dad joke face even though he's wondering why an innkeeper told him the one room was cozy red. Overflow cattle pen. And of course, the star of the show, newborn Jesus, who, as legend has it, is about to face his first culinary challenge. Now, the centerpiece of this episode isn't some heavenly feast, but the humble feed bowl, corn husk mash combined with a curious blend of barn scraps. No room service here, folks, just whatever could be sourced from the nearest livestock. This was no ordinary meal. It was the ultra-low-carb, high barn fiber special, guaranteed to keep the divine infant regular. Building tension, because you know the food safety laws of ancient Judea were minimal. The herd's collective digestive ambiance cast a shadow of suspicion over the mash. Superstitions ran wild. Some whispered that a leaf from a cursed fig tree might have contaminated the batch, while others swore the smell was a portent of future traffic in camels gone rogue. Family friends held their breaths as Mary dipped a tentative finger into the mash, murmuring a prayer that it would nurture rather than initiate an impromptu evacuation. Joseph nervously checked for any sign of rat droppings, because the stable's pest control budget was non-existent. Just when tensions reached a fever pitch and the donkey seemed to roll its eyes in sarcastic disbelief. The twist, baby Jesus, against all odds and parental expectation, accepted the first taste with a surprisingly serene burp. The barn erupted, in a way only animals and exhausted new parents can, into a chorus of contented grunts and relieved sighs. Historians might point out that the manger meal was likely more symbolic than gastronomic. But hey, symbolism doesn't prevent foodborne scandals in the annals of history. In fact, food throughout the ages has had a way of turning peaceful moments into culinary crises. So what's the takeaway here? Even the holiest meals, the camera swoops down to a dusty, cramped Judean hillside in roughly 4 BC, where the scent of livestock and intrigue mingles like an ancient cologne that refuses to quit. It is here, in a stable bathed in the warm glow of a particularly stubbornly flickering lantern, that our story of peace, privacy, and parental panic begins. Alongside the usual suspects, sheep avoiding eye contact, a donkey with a questionable musical talent, and a cow who looks far too judgy, we find Mary and Joseph, soon-to-be parents, starring in history's most modest real estate deal. The atmosphere is rich with the pungent honesty of animal breath and hay, and the muffled murmur of neighborhoods buzzing with gossip about the Messiah's arrival. This cradle of civilization comes with its own unique soundtrack. The occasional braying, a chorus of soft sneezes from the stable hosts discussing the merits of ancient hay versus the newfangled straw, and the constant threat of uninvited relatives appearing at dawn. Our key protagonists show all the stress and exhaustion of first-time parents minus the baby. The near-mythical Jesus who has yet to make his debut. Joseph, forever the carpenter with dreams bigger than his tool belt, juggles the immediate challenge of manger logistics. Mary, ever composed though secretly eyeing the crowd-pleasing cross of discomfort, contemplates the improbable combination of divine destiny and literal stable management. The food of the hour? A meager ration of bread, because even in a story about divine birth, someone forgot to send the catering. Yet in the background simmers an ever-present tension less about politics and more about parental paranoia. Local tradition insists that newborns, especially those destined for greatness, must be shielded from the evil eye and worse, curious neighbors bearing unwanted advice. The family enacts a bizarre yet heartfelt ritual involving herbal perfumes reputed to confuse nosy bystanders and ward off evil spirits, a scent that, to the average attendee, might best be described as eau de hay and desperation. Meanwhile, Joseph debates whether the donkey's braying constitutes a heavenly chorus or a sign of impending neighborhood disturbances. Tensions reach a peak when a group of shepherds arrive, bearing tales of angels and starry prophecies, eager to meet the baby who might globally redefine the rules of holiday gatherings for millennia. The stable's peace hangs by a thread as the faithful and the skeptical cross paths in bassinet-sized battlegrounds of belief and burrow curiosity. Unexpectedly, amid whispered prayers and enthusiastic belly laughs from the farmyard, the donkey lets out a very human-like hiccup, causing a ripple of laughter, a moment that breaks the mystical tension with pure, bovine levity. Historically, the birth of Jesus is marked by an amalgamation of biblical texts, folklore, and centuries of retelling that have painted the nativity scene with as much dramatic flair as factual consensus. Records from the era are about as clear as a sheep in a fog, so one can only imagine the chaos and charm of that first Christmas night with a wink and a nod to the embellishers who came later. So the moral here is clear. Even the holiest of births needs a stable manager, a reliable donkey with questionable vocals, and a healthy dose of humor to keep peace, love, and calm in the air. Just remember, when life hands you a manger, add hay, cue the gentle, celestial music, or at least the slightly awkward braying of a donkey. The year is approximately 4 BCE, give or take a disastrously inaccurate census, and the place, a Bethlehem stable crowded enough to double as the ancient version of a budget Airbnb. The scent? A rich bouquet of hay, livestock, and that curious combination of hope mixed with a suspiciously strong whiff of manure. Meet Mary and Joseph, the original couple on a journey that lacked GPS and customer reviews. They are accompanied by an entourage of animals ranging from the majestic ox, who's clearly unimpressed, to the ever-questioning sheep who won't stop looking at you like you just asked for a tax audit. The centerpiece of this rustic soiree is not a sweetheart, but a newborn Jesus, bundled more in swaddling cloth than in social etiquette. Lighting falls somewhere between flickering oil lamps and the glowing star overhead, the original celestial spotlight, making sure no paparazzi got the perfect shot. The stable sounds create a symphony. the occasional low moo, the high-pitched bleat, and the much less peaceful snorts and snuffles. It's an ancient barnyard jazz ensemble, capably setting the scene for what would become the most famous birth tale ever retold. Tension arises in the form of space scarcity. Imagine a midwife trying to avoid stepping on a sow while negotiating with a camel for elbow room. Meanwhile, family lore mixed with apocalyptic expectations keeps the assembled crowd on edge. Ancient superstitions dictate that a stable birth means the baby's destined for greatness, or, at minimum, a life that involves a lot of shepherding. There is also the curious ritual of swaddling, which basically involves wrapping the baby so tightly it would give any modern yoga instructor a run for their money. Each fold is said to secure not only warmth, but also a cosmic endorsement. Because nothing says divine intervention like a tightly wrapped infant who doubles as a human burrito. Just when the tension peaks, remember, it's hard to relax when sharing a roof with a cow who's judging your choices. A group of local shepherds arrives, guided by angelic tweets, no less. They bring sheepdog energy and far less social grace, but their excitement breaks the barnyard standoff, if only because they loudly proclaim the arrival of the promised child. The twist? Despite all the celestial pomp and awkward proximity, the newborn Jesus remains blissfully unaware that his debut setting is a livestock pen. And the animals? They couldn't care less, provided the hay continues to smell tolerable and no one tries to steal their spot. A side note for the history buffs. Mangers weren't exactly exclusive VIP birth suites. Even archaeologists will tell you that stables were more like communal neighborhoods for animals and people when housing was tight. Not quite the five-star hotel, but at least it was affordable. And the takeaway from all this, even divine births require some serious manger management. A lesson reminding us that sometimes greatness starts in the most inconvenient places, preferably with a donkey providing background music. After all, if you can survive your first night surrounded by animals who eat more than your guests ever will, you're off to a promising start in life. As we draw the curtain on this nativity saga wrapped in hay, let us pause to reflect on the grand absurdity that is humanity's delusion of control over the animal kingdom. From the inception of agriculture, where man fancied himself master of the crops, to the present day, where citizens attempt to reign over domestic creatures, our history speaks volumes of missteps and misunderstandings. We've established farms, pet shops, and even zoos, yet, in the eyes of dogs, we remain just slightly elevated monkeys who lucked into a full bowl at dinner time. Take a moment to consider the truth of animal vengeance that lurks beneath the surface. The peacocks who occasionally parade around like post-college hipsters, the swine that remember and get even by making us roll in mud. All of these creatures carry centuries of grievances. These unjustly overlooked animals might have witnessed their ancestors sacrificed and turned into bacon, or their cousins kept cooped up in a cramped chicken house. In a world full of cliffs from which sheep have leapt and cats who look down from windows, the entire animal realm might just be taking notes for the Great Reckoning. It seems their time of voicing their grievances through a comedic uprising may finally be dawning, while we obliviously prance about with leashes and kibble bags. So, when you see that playful dog in the park, don't assume the wagging tail means joy. Perhaps they're merely winding up to unleash a small-scale revolt against their human overlords. Perhaps that innocent bark begets the uprising of the creatures, a fluff revolution poised to dethrone us from our comfy perimeter. A lesson emerges from this comical chaos. While we may merrily sing carols this season, perhaps instead of waiting for a silent night, we should keep an eye on the family pet, lest it's secretly plotting a coup d'etat while we admire their cuteness. May we carry this absurd wisdom into the coming years, and let it remind us that amidst the miracles of birth, revolution might be just a tailshake away. Heaven help us if a cat decides the time has come. And so, my friends, as we tread forward with our hopes and dreams, remember, the cradle